You ever look at a house and realize it's basically just a very large, very stressed out skeleton wrapped in a raincoat?
That is a terrifying image for anyone currently paying a mortgage, Tiger. I prefer to think of my home as a sturdy fortress, not a rib cage with shingles.
Well, the fortress part depends entirely on whether the guy who framed it was having a good day or if he was daydreaming about lunch. Framing is the one part of making where close enough is fine until it absolutely isn't. People look at a wall and see 2x4s and nails, but it's really a puzzle where every piece is pushing and pulling against everything else to keep the roof from becoming a floor.
I think most makers, even those of us who do furniture or smaller shop projects, get intimidated by framing because the scale is so huge. It feels like if I cut a board wrong on a jewelry box, I've wasted 10 bucks. If I cut a header wrong on a garage door, the house falls down. Is it actually that high stakes, or are you just trying to make yourself sound important?
Oh, the stakes are real, but the secret is that wood is surprisingly forgiving right up until it's suddenly not. I remember the first shed I built by myself. I was 22, had more confidence than common sense, and I decided to eyeball my king studs. I ended up with a door frame that looked like it was designed by Salvador Dali. When I hung the door, it didn't just swing shut. It accelerated like it was trying to escape the building.
Okay, so let's ground this for the folks who want to build a partition wall in their shop or maybe a sturdy shed. Where does the anatomy of a wall actually start? Because I see people talking about plates and studs like everyone should just know what those are.
Right, let's peel the skin back. You've got your sole plate. That's the horizontal piece that sits on the floor. If you're building on concrete, that better be pressure treated, or the moisture from the slab will rot that wood faster than a peach in July. Then you've got your top plate, which caps the wall. But the real magic happens in how you space the vertical bits, the studs.
The 16 inches on center rule, right? My dad used to chant that like a religious mantra whenever we were in the garage. Why 16? Why not an even foot or 18?
It's all about the math of the skinning. See, plywood and drywall come in 4-foot sheets. If you space your studs at 16 inches, you've got exactly 3 spaces and 4 feet. That means every sheet of plywood you buy is going to land perfectly halfway across the stud at both ends. It's the kind of harmony that makes a man want to weep with joy when he's hanging heavy sheets of OSB at 5 in the evening.
So if I'm building a wall and I decide to just put studs wherever it looks right, I'm basically sentencing myself to 3 days of cutting tiny slivers of drywall to fill gaps?
You're sentencing yourself to a special kind of DIY purgatory. And trust me, you don't want to be there.
Let's talk about openings. Doors and windows. That's where I see people get really tripped up. There's a whole vocabulary of jacks and kings and headers. It sounds like a deck of cards.
It's a hierarchy, Alex. You've got your king stud. That's the full-length vertical board that goes from the bottom plate to the top plate. He's the backbone. Then, tucked up right against him, you've got the jack stud. The jack is shorter because he's carrying the weight of the header.
The header being the big chunky horizontal beam over the door?
Exactly. The header is the heavy lifter. Imagine the weight of the roof pushing down. Without a header, that weight would just crush your door frame until you couldn't open the door. The header catches that weight and shunts it sideways into the jack studs, which carry it down to the floor. It's like a visual map of gravity. If you forget a jack stud and just nail the header into the side of the king stud, you're relying on the sheer strength of the nails. And nails are great for keeping things together, but they're lousy as structural pillars.
I've seen some of those renovated houses where people just cut out studs to make a bigger window and didn't put a header back in. The windows usually have that distinct trapped forever look because the frame is sagging.
It breaks my heart. I once walked into a house where the owner wanted an open concept and just took a reciprocating saw to 3 load-bearing studs in the middle of a wall. He told me the ceiling looked a little moody. I told him the ceiling wasn't moody. It was preparing to make a very sudden appearance in his living room.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the tools. If I'm a maker transitioning from making cabinets to framing a small workspace, do I need a whole new kit? Or can I get by with my fine woodworking tools?
Well, you can use an expensive Japanese pull saw to cut a pressure-treated 2x4, but the saw will never forgive you and your arm will feel like it's been through a meat grinder. Framing is the heavy metal of woodworking. You need a good circular saw, something with some oomph, and a framing hammer with a bit of weight behind it.
Speaking of hammers, why do framing hammers have those serrated faces? They look like meat tenderizers.
That's exactly what they are. Those waffle faces bite into the head of the nail so the hammer doesn't slip off when you're swinging like a madman. But here's the trade-off. If you miss the nail and hit your thumb with a waffle face hammer, it turns your digit into a very textured piece of pepperoni.
Note to self, keep the fingertips away from the waffle iron. What about accuracy? In furniture, we talk about 30 seconds of an inch. What's the tolerance in framing?
In framing, if you're within an eighth of an inch, you're a surgeon. If you're within a 16th, you're a liar. The thing you have to account for is that construction lumber isn't stable. That 2x4 you bought this morning is going to twist and shrink as it dries out in your shop. If you try to frame a wall with the precision of a clockmaker, you're going to go insane when the wood starts moving 3 days later. You build it plumb, you build it square, but you leave enough breath for the house to settle.
Wait, I've heard you talk about crowning boards. Is that just checking to see if they're bent?
Every piece of lumber has a personality, and usually that personality is a bit crooked. If you look down the edge of a board and it bows up like a rainbow, that's the crown. When you're framing a floor, you want all those crowns pointing up. That way, when the weight of the furniture and the people gets added, the boards flatten out. If you put half of them crown up and half of them crown down, your floor will feel like a rolling sea.
That accounts for those weird squeaky spots in old houses where you feel like one floorboard is a mountain and the next is a valley.
Bingo. Or in a wall, if you don't check the crowns, you'll end up with a wall that has a belly. You try to hang a cabinet on that later and you'll realize the middle of the wall is 2 inches further out than the top. It makes you want to go back to the lumber yard and have a very stern conversation with the trees.
I can see you now, shaking your fist at a Douglas fir. Okay, let's talk about the mistake that kills the project before it starts. The out-of-square nightmare. How do you ensure a large wall is actually a rectangle and not a parallelogram?
It's the 3 to 4 or 5 rule. Pythagoras was the original framer. If you measure 3 feet on one side and 4 feet on the other, the diagonal has to be exactly 5 feet. Or, better yet, just measure the diagonals of your whole wall frame while it's lying on the ground. If they match, you're golden. If they don't, you give the corner a little persuasion with a sledgehammer until they do. Framing is the only craft where a 5-pound hammer is considered a precision adjustment tool.
I love that. Persuasion. It sounds so much more professional than hitting it until it behaves. What's the biggest shop disaster you've had with framing? Give me the one that made you want to walk away and become a professional kite flyer instead.
It was a summer cabin project. I was framing the roof rafters, long, heavy spans of 2 by 10. I was working alone, which was my first mistake. I had the ridge board propped up on some temporary bracing that was about as sturdy as a wet noodle. I was trying to nail the third rafter in when a gust of wind caught the whole structure.
Oh no, this is the part where everything falls like dominoes, isn't it?
Worse, it didn't fall. It folded. The whole roof structure slowly leaned over in slow motion. I was standing on top of a ladder, holding a powered nail gun, watching $800 worth of lumber turn into a giant wooden accordion. I had to jump off the ladder into a pile of sawdust while the whole thing groaned and collapsed behind me. I sat there for 20 minutes just listening to the silence. My dog came over and looked at the mess, then looked at me, and just walked away. Even the dog was disappointed.
Even the dog. I can't be seen with this guy. What did you learn from that, other than don't trust the wind?
I learned that temporary bracing isn't a suggestion. It's the only thing keeping you from a very expensive stack of firewood. Now, when I frame, I overbrace everything. If a hurricane comes through while I'm at lunch, I want the house to still be there when I get back, even if it's just the studs.
I think that's the takeaway for a lot of makers. When we transition from the bench to the building, we forget that we aren't just fighting gravity, we're fighting physics on a larger scale.
Exactly. You're building something that has to survive the seasons. It has to expand in the humidity and shrink in the winter. It has to handle the wind pushing against the side and the snow pushing down on the top.
So, for someone starting their first big framing project this weekend, maybe it's a shed, maybe it's a tiny house, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them to keep them from ending up in a pile of sawdust like you did?
Don't trust your tape measure to do the thinking for you. Use your eyes, line things up, stand back, and look at the lines. If it looks crooked to the eye, it's crooked, no matter what the little lines on the tape say. And for the love of all that is holy, buy a box of the good nails. The cheap ones from the bargain bin have heads that pop off if you look at them funny. Using bad fasteners to save $10 on a $1,000 project is like putting bicycle tires on a Ferrari.
A Ferrari with bicycle tires. I think that's the most tiger metaphor I've ever heard.
It's the truth. Look, framing is the foundation of everything we do. You can put the most beautiful walnut siding on a building, but if the framing is soft, the whole thing is just a pretty mask on a crumbling face, get the skeleton right, and the rest is just dressing it up for the party.
Well, I feel slightly more confident about my ability to build a wall now, though I might still call you before I start swinging that waffle face hammer near my thumbs.
My phone is always on, Alex. Just don't call me when the wind is blowing. I still get a little twitchy.
That's our deep dive into the bones of the build. Next time, maybe we'll talk about how to actually make those walls look like a home without losing our minds, or our deposit at the lumberyard.
Sounds like a plan. Just remember, measure twice, cut once, and if it's still too short, start calling it modern art.
See you next time at the Tiger Den.